Hey guys, you're about to watch my second video about fixing my back with Dr. Stu McGill and Brian Carroll. And in this video, Dr. McGill is going to talk about the pain assessment that we did in the first video. And he ran me through a really thorough assessment, probably about an hour, where he recreated the pain and then did some things to try to see which positions put me in more pain or in less pain. And using that pain assessment, come up with kind of a game plan. In addition, he looked at my MRIs and pretty much what he thought he would find is what he saw. Which is I have a bulging disc, and that seems to be the root cause of a lot of my pain. But he really went way more in depth than anybody else that I've ever seen. And more to that, he told me more about what was on my MRI than anybody I'd ever been around. And he didn't treat me like a 5-year-old and just dismiss me and say, oh, well, you probably shouldn't lift heavy, which has been pretty much every other doctor's recommendation. He said that he thought it was reasonable for me to be able to train pain-free in the future. But first we had to give my back some time to recover and put in the proper program for recovery. So in this video, you're going to see Professor McGill go over a lot of the things we talked about. And really by the end of this, I felt so much better having a professor like McGill, who does all the research on low back pain, essentially tell me that he mostly had good news and that I was going to be fine as long as I did the right things. So I left feeling very encouraged. I think you guys are going to get a lot out of this video. Make sure you watch it, like it, share it, and go check out Dr. McGill's book, The Back Mechanic, as well as his book with Brian Carroll, The Gift of Injury. So Stu, you've had a chance to assess me and walk me through some different things. What'd you find?
Well, I found some good news, and actually mostly good news going forward. So this won't surprise you. You have multiple disc bulges, but they're really small and manageable. One has, in particular, an open fissure to it. And what I mean by that is, imagine if I had an orange seed and I was squeezing it and I wanted it to come out towards you every time. I would bias the squeeze on this side, and through pressure, hydraulic pressure, it would push it out towards you every time. So at one of your discs, which is filled with a gel, if you bent your spine and squeezed it, you see how that would create a hydraulic effort to push the gel through one way. And you've experienced that clinically as you sit too long in a car or sit at your desk, and yet you can alleviate that by standing. Well, talk about training with poor form. That's what poor form is, the equivalent of. Creating what a biomechanist would say, the thrust line down through the bar comes down through your spine. You have to shape your spine a certain way, and as an athlete, you know what good form is. It's the proper shape to stop that hydraulic pressure from going to one side and creating a disc bulge. So when we talk about neutral spine, for you, it would be using your hips, keeping the shape of your back as you descend. And we talked a little bit about neck posture as you're pulling, and it's the same thing there. If you have a good reason to change the length of muscle to produce more force, then you have a reason for changing the shape of your neck. But if you don't have that reason and you're not failing in the strength test, if it happens to be a deadlift, for example, at lockout, why shape your neck and create a stress concentration? Because tissue damage occurs where the stress concentration is the greatest. So there's the little story on disc bulges. They're very manageable for you. We did find some instability. And what I mean by that is, imagine a knee. When it becomes unstable, the orthopedist does a drawer test, and they see if there's instability or micro movements occurring at that joint. Well, I was testing micro movements, and do they correlate with pain with you? And no surprise, at L4-5, which is where the disc is the flattest, that creates the greatest micro movement, and that triggered the most sensitivity.
Right.
But when we asked you to squeeze your glutes and raise your legs, that was a trick to shape your back and then stiffen it, and your pain was much less. So once again, good news, bad news. We know that's there. It's like when you let air out of your car tire, the tire bulges on the road. It gets a little bit sloppy, but you firm up the tire with more air pressure. But in your case, with appropriate muscle coordination and stiffening, you were able to stiffen it at that micro movement, and yet again, your pain is gone. The good news there is, in 10 years from now, nature will stiffen up that joint, and you won't retire with this, oh, if I get out of bad form, I'll get pain. That will go away. You don't hear 70-year-olds complaining about disc bulges and spine instability. They have other issues, but not that. Two other things. You have a viscous nerve drag. What I mean by that is the spinal cord comes down through your spine through a canal. The disc bulges, and having flatter discs now narrows down the size of that hole. As we pulled on the nerve and the nerve roots exiting, they exit through the hole with a little bit of a friction drag to them. So as I pulled them one way, the first time we did it, you felt a sensation.
Yep.
But the second and third time, you didn't. And then we pulled the nerve root through the other way, and we pulled it again. And of course, first cycle, you got the nerve drag. So you're getting a little bit of a nerve drag there, but the nice thing is it's flossing. And as long as a nerve root flosses, and we do a little bit more flossing, it has this curious ability to find its own pathway. So in your area of expertise in nutrition, you've said several times, the body seeks homeostasis.
Yep.
And if you create the correct adaptations, other systems will kick in. Nerves are the same. Keep them flossing. So again, it's another good news thing. With appropriate training, those nerves will come back and flow freely, and that symptom will most likely look after itself as well. The final thing was, since I knew I was going to be meeting with you, I watched you squat on the internet, and you've described it yourself as you get a little bit of asymmetry as you go to the deepest part of the hole. And there's two components that I'm seeing in that, and it's mostly out of your hip. So the hip joint itself is slightly asymmetric, or they're different left and sides, and we all have these asymmetries, of course. Now the hamstring muscle is a little bit tighter on that one side. I would predict that most people will say, well, stretch the tight side. That's a killer for a power athlete. The strongest muscle, you want that there. You want tight hamstrings, and you want tightness as you're going, once again, to the depth of your legal squat. That's all you need.
Right.
If you have any more mobility, that's a detriment for you,
right,
if that's what you want to be. So I'm not going to say stretch the tight one. I'm going to say try and work on tightening the lax one. And some of these. So there's a little bit of an opposite.
That would be the exact opposite response I would get from anybody who I've ever spoken with.
Right.
But that makes complete sense. Like you said, looseness is the enemy of power.
Yeah, I'm afraid it is, but I'll stand by my lifters.
No, I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing with you.
Okay, that's my impression of what's going on. The first order of business is to get rid of the cause, and you're very savvy already in what we call spine hygiene. I can pick on you just a little bit more, and I've watched you do different things around, in and out of a chair, just a little bit more consciousness of that. If you're going to sit for a while, use lumbar support and that kind of thing, and it will give you just a little bit more for the training room.
Yep.
A training room being the gym
Yep.
in this particular case. You have a wonderful animated personality. And you use your body to express yourself, and you get into, and you express your passion. And just a little bit of a thought on that is to, it'll be difficult, but to maintain your passion and tone down calm your body down. And anxiety, we all are faced with anxiety and challenges and whatnot. But to be conscious of that pathway, to try and not to let it tense up your body. So when you are having a day where you've got a little bit of a back trigger going, ease off on the passion and still execute. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, sure. I'm, like you said, I'm very animated. I talk with my hands.
You do.
You know, that's very.
Which is it's the two sides of the coin. You wouldn't be who you are today if you didn't have passion, and we're all in that boat. Yeah. But anyway, I told you I'm going to give you my best effort, so I'm telling you everything.
That's perfect.
I'm seeing. So movement tools, you know how to squat. Think about that when you're on and off the toilet, in and out of your car, brushing your teeth, tying your shoes, sneezing. We've spent the day with Brian Carroll here, and you notice Brian when he ties his shoe, when he bends down, we dropped our drink on the floor and he mopped the floor. Did you notice how he did that?
No, I didn't see it.
I did. It was perfect. So you can look at someone with the level of athleticism that he has developed post-injury and substantial injury, and but he's earned that. And he's earned it through his discipline and professionalism there. So there's just a little bit of thought. You know the big three. We're going to cover those when we get out at the gym. Interval walking in very small, short spurts throughout the day. Won't compromise your strength and metabolism that you're trying to create as a strength athlete. And two other things that just came up casually, I think, as we were having our discussion, when you were saying you were doing squats for reps, or pulls for reps, I think it was. Someone with your history now can no longer afford this. And in fact, you will develop a better ability of your body to handle load if you think singles now. And every lift deserves respect.
Yeah.
And you're building a engram, a muscle memory of that lift that never changes.
Yeah.
And you violate that so much when you start lifting for reps. The fifth rep gets a bit tired, you get a bit sloppy. You can't afford to pollute your engram anymore with that sloppiness. It must be pristine, perfect every time. And it's a very Russian, Eastern European philosophy of strength. But this will become more important to you now that you have a few miles on your body and you can't afford a bad lift anymore.
You're right.
And final element, I've reviewed your MRs, and only because I've learned a little bit about you now, it allows me to read them with a lot more precision and insight than, say, a radiologist who never meets with the patient. And what's in there is multi-layers of Schmorl's nodes on the end plates. Those are caused by overload of compression for a spine that either hasn't had the years of exposure to adapt, but I know you do have those years. But when you come from the position of a bodybuilder who trains, say, 3 times a week, because training is all about adapting the muscular adaptation.
That's right.
As you shift to a strongman powerlifting type of training exposure, you now have to shift your mentality not only from muscle, but shift it over to bone as well, because it's those bony fractures that are accumulating now, and to adapt bone, it's not a 2-day recovery cycle.
Right.
It's a 4 and a 5 day recovery cycle. So you'll see the grand old men of powerlifting, go and look at Ed Cohn and I'm thinking of people like that who will train heavy, and then it's 4 or 5 days off, and you will develop and last longer by doing that. And again, what's the pathway? Well, the collagen fibers that form the disc form and join in with things called Sharpie's fibers into the cartilaginous end plate. If you slowly break the scaffolding of those of the end plate, the fibers will pull off and create the pathway for an open fissure that we saw. So it's really important to think of those adaptations. But what's the cure? It's just a little bit of a detail in shifting your programming. Yeah. So that's what I'm seeing from this perspective, and it's mostly good news, but I don't think on the bad news side there's nothing there that really can't be addressed with a little bit of more attention to the details. So that's it.
You don't think, one of the things you mentioned was, right away you mentioned my anatomy.
Yeah. Of
you would not pick me out as a great squatter.
Well, I wouldn't have picked you out, no, as the perfect body type for powerlifting.
No.
But, with your style, you're going to have to set a little bit higher. Now, the other good thing of that is that you've got a better lever from your hips through to your shoulders, because you tend to be shorter here relative to the length of these big jacks that you have here. So again, what you gain on a swing, you lose on a merry-go-round, and vice versa. But, this notion that, there's a perfect way to squat, there isn't. You try and optimize the advantages that you do have through technique and minimize the disadvantages, and that's, you get some great coaching. And again, I'll just draw the parallel to what you do in your world. There are no quick fixes and universal answers. It's you study a person to obtain enough insight that you can now adapt your principles to that person and customize them a little bit. And otherwise a computer would fix us all, and that just won't happen.
That's right. And so on the front, you mentioned you don't think squatting wider would help me either.
Well, I tested the architecture of your hip sockets, which primarily determines that. And if you had, for example, during the hip scour, if we brought your hip out in abduction, we suddenly got a lot more depth, I would say, squat wider. But you have, which would be considered a very Western, Northern European hip socket, which is square. And it just comes and it squares right across. So you have no advantage to go wider. So now you want to go with where the muscles have the best lever. So I think where you are, you probably have found that, otherwise you wouldn't have had the success that you've already had. So you're just about right on with that. But it's interesting how with some lifters, I'll say, you're about 2 inches too narrow, and then they go and try widening out, which feels awkward for the first few lifts, and all of a sudden they're hitting their personal best.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I didn't find any stone unturned there with you.
Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for the analysis, and I'm
great. Well, I'm looking forward to getting together with Brian and you and seeing what we see under the platform.
Yeah, awesome.